Hi, my name is Lisa Shea, and this is part of the video series on horror authors and how they craft their books. So I'm here with talented, fantastic author, Stephen Rogers. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be talking with you today.
Thank you. So tell us about the kinds of stories you write.
I actually write all across the map, all the different genres from mystery to science fiction to fantasy to romance to western to literary and horror.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing about horror is I never really think about it as a separate genre. I always think of it as really one of the other genres, but with the negative emotions amplified.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an easy transition to take something, any idea really, and turn it horrific. It's just by turning up the volume of the dark emotions associated with it.
That's a great way to look at it. I haven't thought of that before. And I suppose it makes sense. Some people write deep sea horror and some people write Western horror. So they're taking an existing topic area and just infusing, infusing a lot of fear into it.
And it's funny how there are trends. Like for about a year and a half, there were all these calls for anthologies for deep water horror.
Mm-hmm.
And then for a while, a whole bunch of different people were looking for Western horror.
Mm-hmm.
And things just, the trends come and go
Mm-hmm.
as things strike people's fancy.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So is there a particular type of horror story that you tend to be drawn to?
I tend to write to what people are looking for.
Okay.
So if I see a lot of people looking for, deep water horror,
Mm-hmm.
I get in that mind frame and then write a bunch of stories in that vein. Types of horror that I've never really done much with are vampires, which is like the most common horror trope out there.
Mm-hmm.
And classic monsters I haven't done that much around.
Mm-hmm.
But really I will write anything that either a spark just comes with an idea or there's someone looking for something and I use that as the spark.
Okay, so you like to work from prompts someone gives you a kernel of an idea and then you just run with that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things I love about writing for anthologies versus writing and then just submitting to magazines, is that the editors of an anthology are usually looking for very specific themes, which then you can play around with. So I have a lot of fun with that, and it seems to generate a lot of ideas that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Right, it gets you to think outside the box of your normal type of writing style.
Yeah.
So tell me about this 4 and 20 story.
4 and 20 was a response to an anthology call. They were looking for horror stories mixed with fairy tales and nursery rhymes.
That's an interesting prompt.
That's what I love. Like I said, I love about anthologies. I've written for over 100 of them because the prompts are just so interesting. And it just forces you to think of something that you wouldn't have thought of. Or to take, like if you decided you wanted to write a zombie story, it's very easy to just start writing the typical zombie story. But then you find anthologies, they're looking for zombie stories set in space.
Right.
Zombie stories set in a world where romance is possible with them. Zombie stories that have to do with animals. I mean, and then it makes you think, oh, how can I take this idea and just twist it in a new way that interests me?
One of the features of this story is the strong relationships you craft between the characters. So is that something that interests you?
Yeah, I think that really any story is strengthened when there's great, interesting people involved in it. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of genre conventions this is what has to happen here, this is what's to happen there, this is what the audience expects to happen here. When you can root it in real world characters, it just allows it to elevate it, and it also makes it more connectable to people. Connectable?
That sounds good.
Relatable to people,
Yep.
because they are, for the most part, people.
Mhm.
And it just allows, it's a shorter bridge for them to jump into that fictive world.
Mhm.
So, yes, people and the relationships between them are the core of any story that
Mhm.
really brings me in.
Do you find you base them on real people?
Not specific people. When I was very young, one of the things I decided I wanted to do was not get a job somewhere and then spend the next 30 years working there, because it would give me a very small pool of experiences with people.
Mhm.
So I specifically set out to job hop,
Mhm.
job hop,
Yep.
job hop, moving between jobs in and outside of industries so that I would interact with as many people as possible. And because of that, I have a wealth of experiences with all sorts of different types of people, so that I'm not basing any characters on any one specific person, but elements of all the people that I've interacted with throughout my life.
Oh, well. Well, and that must give you a great range of types of characters to work with because of that.
Characters and motivations and how people react to any situation.
Mhm.
One of the flaws that I see in a lot of, say, horror, there'll be a horrific thing happening, and then all the different characters react to it in the same way.
Mhm.
Whereas in real life, if you have a room full of people, they don't react to anything the same way. Even
Yep.
if you put out free pizza, there's going to be two people that react differently than everybody else in the room.
Right.
So I think that it's an important part to remember, that there's no such thing as like character, and all characters are that character. It's just there's a wealth of diversity and of people.
Mhm.
There's people that speak well on camera, and there's people who don't.
Oh, you speak very well. And the characters in this story each clearly have their own motivations and way of looking at the world. And I think that's a lot of what brings interest to it.
I love the idea that when all the characters are motivated and they have their own desires and things, goals they're trying to reach, you don't really have to come up with outside twisted plot points.
Mhm.
It will just grow out of the characters interacting with each other, because they all have different desires that they're
Right.
trying to reach.
So do you write the stories knowing how they're going to end, or do you write them and then see how they're going to end?
A little bit of both. I I know there are some people that start with the ending, which is rarely what happens. I usually start with the first line is what kicks the story off. But I like the concept that within the first paragraph, you have created what's going to be the mirror of the ending.
Mm-hmm.
So in many ways, just depending on how you start it, you've sort of fashioned how the ending is going to come out.
Okay.
Although sometimes there are some stories I have no idea what's going to happen until I arrive at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Every story is its own unique individual.
Yep.
Like a person.
Yep. Well, and that's good, because then you're not just reading the same story over and over again. Right. When you go through a person's library, you're getting new experiences with each one.
And you're not writing the same story over and over again yourself.
Right.
Because even within very formula writing structures, the fact that each one is so different makes one a new, every story a new experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it keeps it fresh,
Yep.
no matter how many stories you write.
Yep, and that's definitely a good thing for most writers.
Yeah.
There are some writers out there who seem to treasure the cookie cutter approach, but your stories are definitely not cookie cutter. They're all very unique from each other.
If the story's already been written, what's the point of writing it again?
Yep, very true. So in this particular story, I think you have a pandemic that causes the zombie birds, right?
Yes.
So you knew that a pandemic was coming. So when are the zombie birds coming?
Probably just as soon as we get the vaccine.
Oh, okay.
We'll think everything's fine,
Mm-hmm.
and then the closing shot will be the zombie birds emerging.
Okay, excellent. Good to be prepared. Put up
I
netting everywhere.
I recently rewatched I Am Legend with Will Smith,
Mhm.
based on oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. Anyway, based on the book, he actually started with the trope of vampires, but the whole thing in I Am Legend that I thought was funny was that pandemic all came out of a vaccine.
Okay.
They thought they had cured cancer, and it turned out that there were unintended side effects, which were turned people into monsters.
So Richard Matheson?
Richard Matheson, yes.
I had to look it up.
He is probably my favorite writer,
Okay.
especially of horror.
Mhm.
And one of the things that he did was really introduce the idea that horror was part, or horror could just emerge out of the everyday.
Mhm.
Horror could affect people in a suburban setting. It wasn't gothic settings that created horror things, or the
Abandoned churches.
just although I've had stories set in abandoned churches, just the fact that it brought it to real life. No matter how weird the horror was, it just started in your kitchen.
Mhm.
So that was one of the things I loved about what he did.
Mhm. Could be the girl next door.
Yeah,
Turns into a blood-sucking vampire.
that's why I live on a dead end. It
Oh.
cuts down on the number of blood-sucking vampires that can live next door.
I don't know. Dead ends have their own particular problems. It seems to be where things happen.
And I seem to have lived on a lot of dead ends during my life. I don't know if there's something there.
Mhm. Well, the very fact that dead is built into the word of the location you're
Sort of a subtle clue. Not a good idea to live here.
in. All right, so let's talk about it. Is it this Rattenkrieg? Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh.
That had a good twist in it. I was not expecting that to be the way that it was at the end.
I have long been a fan, if fan is the correct word, and it's probably not, a student of World War II.
Okay.
And I forget what actually was the genesis of this story, but I have mined the World War II setting for both mysteries and horror stories, because it seemed very ironic to have crimes and horrors to occur during what was a horrific event.
Right.
So I've played around with that a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems very fertile.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when I started reading this, I thought it was heading in the direction of the werewolves, which were real Nazi troops near the end of the war, going around killing off in a guerrilla type of fashion, just causing mayhem for, I suppose, no reason is not quite what it was. They wanted to be able to do something. If they couldn't actually win the war, at least they could go out killing people.
Right.
But it was not werewolves. I'll give a spoiler. Something other than werewolves are happening here. But again, you bring great details, and in this case, it's not about relationships because he's alone in this situation, but he still has in his mind the relationships with his fellow comrades, and it still plays into the way he's interacting with the situation.
Yes. The just going back to werewolves, there was a anthology. They were looking for werewolves, but it had to be any other animal except for a wolf.
Okay.
And I ended up using a were-sloth. Because I thought, what was like the opposite of being chased down by a werewolf?
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a creature that couldn't chase you down.
Mm-hmm.
Which then became, well, how do I turn this into like a horrific type thing? And it ended up being told from the point of view of the person that was turning into the were-sloth.
Oh, okay.
And how he tries to save the world from himself.
Mm-hmm.
Once he realized what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But I love writing. You could just have so much fun with anything.
Mm-hmm. I would think about were-rabbits, but I suppose Monty Python did that one already.
Nibble on your butt.
Yep.
Actually, one of the things about the Battle of Stalingrad was there was a book written about it called War of the Rats.
Mm-hmm.
So that might have been part of what made me go the rat route.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the whole vermin imagery was very powerful in it, so it all played with each other very well.
I love when just pieces come together. We have just like indiscriminate research, and then it just point after point works with the story that you're telling.
Mm-hmm.
Just very exciting.
Yep. I had that happen with one of my stories recently where I chose a name out of random, and then when I looked into the song that the name went with, it actually directly related to the topic I was writing about. So you never know when those strange little connections are going to pop up.
And strange how often they do.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, I planned that. That's that's how I fashioned the world, so they would make this one story work.
Right. Well, but I think it also helps to have a knowledge base so that you can see that the connections are there, or I suppose in our modern Google world to be able to sit there and have the time to do the research and find all those little details. Because it happened to be Eleanor Rigby was the song I was looking into.
Yeah.
And if the details about the background of the song hadn't been on the web, then I would have not had any idea about the way the web was crafted. And I'll just give a little brief description of what happened. Paul McCartney said that Eleanor Rigby was a name that he just came up with out of the ether and it didn't have any real world meaning. But then they discovered recently that in the graveyard that he and John used to hang out in all the time, there was a gravestone for Eleanor Rigby. So they had seen it all the time when they were teenagers, when they were hanging around in this graveyard, and he didn't register it consciously, but it sunk into his subconscious and it just popped out again when he was writing the song. And the whole purpose of my story was about the subconscious holding on to things and having them pop out to try to give you information. So it just worked very well. But I wouldn't have known of that about the song unless I had found it on Wikipedia.
That's what I've spent more and more time over the years reading nonfiction because it's all grist for the mill, and you never know whatever you're reading about how it will someday inform a story and add a level of richness that you wouldn't have envisioned otherwise. Yep.
Well, a lot of the little details you have even in this story, it shows all of the background that you bring to it. And it makes the story that much more immersive to have all those details in it. And plus, I just like your writing style in general.
It's
little eyes.
Strange to think of, like, this story. I didn't buy all of the resource material yet when I had written this story, but I have like 400 books on this subject. And you could say that I spent, thousands of hours researching in order to produce a short story. There's no cost effectiveness in sort of time, which made me think, well, what other stories can I set here? just
That
to,
was exactly what I was thinking,
yeah.
is that if you have all this knowledge about it, maybe you should do a whole series of stories all set in different aspects of it.
I do. And some of them mystery, some of them horror. I actually wrote a novel set on the Eastern Front with the idea that I would do 4 of them, each of the different seasons, but it has not, no one's been interested in publishing it yet.
You can self-publish.
Yeah, it's a lot for a novel. It seems like a lot of work. I self-published collections, but it just seems the long tail of novels at this point in my life, it's easier to just have someone else take over the publishing side of it.
Okay. Fair enough.
I might have a different answer a year from now, but that's where I'm at right now.
Well, if you're shopping it around, you never know if a publisher will pick it up. So
Yeah.
good luck to you with
Thank
that
you.
project. All right, so the third story I have here is Trick Candles, which was also one that I didn't see that ending coming at all, and also has really strong characters. I mean, these are people that I think most of us can relate to in our lives, in a situation that, you know, maybe we haven't been in the exact situation, but we know how it would feel.
Right. Yeah. This could very easily have been just a literary story about these characters experiencing these family dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
But I just liked, you know, amplifying the emotions in it, because it's not, it doesn't really, and this is true of several stories actually, it doesn't really become horrific until the end.
Mm-hmm.
And before then, the fantastical elements are almost exciting to the people.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost a positive. There's words I'm looking for.
Well, I think there's still a sense of creeping dread in there that something is just not right in this relationship, and you're waiting to see how it's going to go disastrously wrong. So it doesn't ever feel like there's going to be a happy ending in this story to me. I mean, I started it reading it knowing that it was horror, but even so, just how it started to unfold, there was this sense of a downward spiral that was going to suck them all in.
That's, well, I was going to say horror is one of the few genres that will allow you to do the down ending.
Mm-hmm.
Although even in a lot of horror, you know, people want to be reassured that they're secure in their life and that civilization as they know will go on. I mean, people prefer happy endings.
Well, I think many people do, but I do also think that there's a portion of people who are happy with, you know, Romeo and Juliet doesn't end happily, or Hamlet, so people are okay with the thought of a tragedy. I think as long as they know going into it that that's what they're going to get. If they curl up thinking they're going to get a nice happy romance and then they get to the end and the characters both die, they're probably not pleased with that experience.
Yeah. I watched a movie the other night, and it was a sci-fi horror. They come across aliens when they're in outer space on the space station. And I was sort of surprised with the ending, because it seemed like the humans were going to sort of defeat and be victorious, and then there was a twist at the ending which basically said, no, all life on Earth as we know it is going to be destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, they can't really do a sequel.
Mm-hmm.
Unless, well, I guess they could do a sequel.
Yep, the plucky humans.
I'm surprised they went so dark.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love Philip K. Dick, and he'll do that often a lot of times. Things looks like things are going to work out, and then just the whole world collapses.
Yeah. He is someone I would like to really study more. I haven't done an in-depth study of him, because he has generated so much, has such an effect on pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
His short stories.
Well, and you know, he was a master of getting concepts across in a very short space of time, and then it can get expanded out, like Blade Runner was expanded out, or Screamers, or all those kinds of stories. And it was the Screamer story I was thinking of, which was made into a movie, but it was a cult movie rather than a very popular one. So just all of his stories have such great characters and situations in them that it lends itself to expanding out to a greater world. And the same thing with some of your stories here. You know, the Candles one might be hard to expand out into a full-length movie, but I could definitely see the Zombie Birds one having an entire world where this was happening and how the different people were handling it. And, you know, some people hiding in caves and some people banding together.
Yeah, Trick Candles, you know, sometimes you write stories and years go by and you see a reference to a title and you don't really remember writing something by that title. And you read the story, I'm like, I don't even remember writing this. But Trick Candles is one of those stories that haunts me. I think of it often. And it has been reprinted once or twice. But it's sad that, like, they don't, like, continue to have a life. And
that's why you should self-publish them on Amazon.
That's true. Because, you know, it appears in a magazine and then the issue's gone. Or it'll be in an anthology and then it goes out of print. But it's like, you want to see that friend again. You want to give them another chance to find readers and interact with the world.
Well, if you've got the rights back and it's already gone through 2 different rounds of publishing, I'm a strong proponent of getting that out on Kindle.
Okay, fine, I'll start self-publishing.
Well, you don't have to do the novels, but for the little short ones.
I gotta go. I gotta put up.
Well, I think there are a lot of people, and I've heard it from a lot of writers, that right now during the pandemic, they can't deal with reading long things. They just don't have the mental focus to be able to sit down and do that. But they love little short stories because it gives them a sense of achievement and, you know, some enjoyment in reading it. But it's not a big time commitment. So definitely on my side, I'm seeing short stories are very popular, and you've got a huge library of them. So
the other thing I would think that the effect the pandemic will have is right now, television production, movie production, they're shut down.
Yep.
Whereas people sitting home alone, that's a recipe for writing more. And especially if they're self-publishing, they can be putting out more original content than they have ever before.
Yep.
And the consumers are looking at, it's the same 600 movies on Netflix, the same 600 shows on Amazon Prime. We're gonna reach a point where there is no new content. And the writers who are producing and self-publishing will have content for them to consume.
Yep, very true. And it's also pretty cool that people can be interested in a very small subgroup of content. So they could like horror, but they could like, I don't know, relationship horror, we'll call it, like the Candle story.
Yeah.
And if they find an author who is really good at that, now they can just sit there and really focus on that author and read all of their different works. So I think the current model of publishing is really good for readers, that if they don't like, I don't know, gory horror, it could be in the old days if they went to a Barnes and Noble, they'd only have 20 books to choose from, and they might have to suffer through the gory horror to wait for the next novel to come out in a style that they appreciate. But now with Amazon, they could just sit there and really read the stuff they love and find the authors they love and get access to all of their books.
Right.
So,
that's one of the big negatives to the way I have gone after stories. Because for every, you know, if you first read a story of mine that was a sweet romance, you then think, okay, I can continue reading his stuff to read more sweet romances. Well, then the next one is a noir mystery. And then the next one is a soft horror. And the next one is a dark horror. And then it's a science fiction. So I'm not someone that has really positioned myself well for easy consumption.
well, but I do that too. I write in all sorts of topic areas, and I think, you know, there'll be some people who say, okay, I'll only read her romances. But there's a lot of people who like a style of writing and aren't that picky whether they're reading a Western story or a contemporary story. And if you have a wonderful style to the way that you write, and someone who gets hooked on that will happily go hopping through your
Right.
different topic areas, and that helps expand them out of their box too.
Right.
You know, they might say, I don't like horror, but oh, look, this one that Stephen wrote is fantastic, so maybe I do like horror.
Yeah, I had thought of actually doing anthologies. Typically, you know, they're very structured around a genre because they think, okay, we're going to put all together stories of people that like dangerous robots.
Yeah.
And that way, the person who buys it knows exactly what they're getting and they're happy with every story. But I've wondered about the feasibility of mashing together completely different types of stories just to broaden people's awareness. It's like even Stephen King, he's got, you know, he started with just straight horror, but then there was a fantasy, and now, I mean, there's literally, he's been allowed to go all over the map. And people, I've never heard anyone say they hated some of these Stephen King books. They always, I like Stephen King, whatever I've read of his. So he has been able to get past that genre box.
Right. Well, then it might help people who feel, you know, a lot of guys feel uncomfortable reading romances. But if they get hooked on your horror stuff and then you happen to write a romance, they say, oh, well, I'll give it a try because it's a writer that I like. And suddenly they realize, oh, I do like romances, or at least I like Stephen's way of presenting romances.
Yeah.
So I think it helps the reader, too, to help expand their horizons.
Good point. That was one of the, I don't know if the Writer's Digest book club is still around, but they would just, you would get a volume and it would be 4 best-selling novels. And often, you know, there's one that you might have picked off the shelf yourself, and the others you wouldn't have. But now, since you have it, you paid for it, give it a try. So it's a great way for people to find writers.
Well, and Amazon helps with that now with their look inside, so you can go poking around and find things. But I do think that people tend to fall into a rut where they say, okay, I like, I don't know, deep sea horror, and then they just go into the deep sea horror area and read through all of those and never emerge out of it. So I think an author like you who is cross-genre lures them out of that box because they say, okay, I really like Stephen's works. Oh, look, he's written this other kind of thing. I'll give it a shot and see what it's like.
Yeah, I'll have to think of a way that I could organize so that there's a structure to the anthology. Well, it would be a collection if it's just me, but food for thought.
Yeah, I'm sure that you could come up with something.
Yeah.
And then that would be fun because someone who likes your style would try all sorts of different areas and say, oh, I really do like science fiction. I thought I didn't like science fiction, but this one's pretty cool.
There used to be a software called Grammatics, which ran all sorts of analysis on writing samples. And there was one month that I happened to have a romance in Woman's World and a very violent story in Plots with Guns.
Okay.
And I fed both stories through the analyzer, and the numbers everywhere were identical. So I thought that was just interesting because I had assumed that my writing style would change writing 2 such different stories.
Right.
But no.
That's an interesting observation. My boyfriend just got home. So,
boyfriend or an axe murderer?
Well, could be an axe murderer. One never knows. Could be both, he says. So a number of my fellow writers have not submitted to try to get into anthologies before. Do you have any words of advice for people who are trying to do that?
One of the, well, first of all, read the guidelines and know what it is that the editors are looking for. And then generate a bunch of ideas and reject the first 10 you come up with.
Okay.
Because those are the same 10 that a lot of the writers submitting to the anthology will come up with. And what you want to do is excite the editor with a story that they didn't see coming,
Okay.
but still fits what they're looking for.
Hmm.
And that's what I've tried to do.
I imagine that must be the challenge for someone who's putting together an anthology. Is you put out a topic like, I don't know, sunflowers, and then you probably get story after story that is in the same theme because people have some sort of instant reaction to the
Right.
topic area that you're doing. So I suppose it's like you were saying with the whole werewolves. If you say werewolves but not a werewolf, I bet a whole bunch of people would go right to werebears as
Yeah.
like the next kind of thing. So if you wrote a werebear story, now you're in with 80,000 other werebear stories, and you really have to stand out to be the best out of those.
Because a lot of the editors will specifically say in the guidelines, with that example, it's like, if you're going to do werebear, we're going to pick one.
Mm-hmm.
So your odds are better if you do a werecat, wereworm, weresloth,
Right.
because there's going to be less competition for those spots.
Right. Right, because they don't just want 12 stories that are all nearly identical to each other.
Right.
They're looking for some sort of a breadth of content in there.
Yeah.
So do you tend to submit to one place and then just wait out the 6 months or whatever the time period is? Do you like try to do a whole bunch of them at the same time?
You mean of the same story, or?
Well, I guess either the same story, that would depend if they allowed simultaneous submissions, but I was thinking in general about your writing plans. Do you write one thing at a time or lots of things at the time?
For the longest time, I only wrote one thing at a time. And as time has gone on, I have allowed myself to start other things, because sometimes an idea will come to me, and if I don't jump on it right then, I lose the tone that was in my head when I came up with the idea.
Yep.
The big downside to that is I end up with a lot of started stories.
Right, right.
And then on the submission side, I never simultaneous sub even when they allow it,
Oh, okay.
because I'm always, well, what if they both want it?
Mm-hmm.
There's enough stress about the whole situation and just odd situations. I mean, I remember one time one of the markets rejected it. I continued submitting it. Someone else bought it, published it, and at about that same time, the market that had rejected it published it.
Oh.
So the second market, the editor was like, what are you doing? You can't sell it to two different places. And I'm like, I didn't sell it to two different places. Here's a copy of their rejection. I don't know why they printed it.
Mm-hmm.
So that could easily have turned ugly.
Right.
And submitting, if there's a lot of places that it can go, chances are it's not definite enough.
Okay.
So I find like a lot of stories, I end up with like multiple versions of the stories, because this market wants something that the story's close to what they want, but it doesn't quite fit exactly their tone or what they're looking for. So then I end up with just dozens of copies of the same story, which is then weird, because then I have all these copies. Now, if there's someone that has a general guideline, well, which one do I send?
Right, right. How do you organize all your files if you have multiple copies of multiple stories?
Very poorly. They're all just saved by file name, but then sometimes after the file name, I'll say the something version.
Okay.
But it's all very, very disorganized, sad to say. One of the things I wish I had done from the very beginning is assigned numbers to the stories. So it was just story 10004 in the database, which then would have allowed me to better organize and structure when I decided the name should change depending on what the market was looking for, or if the editors changed the name of a story.
Mm-hmm.
Because I end up with, I submitted this story 30 times over 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden this story, which seems to appear out of nowhere, was published, but it was that earlier story.
Mm-hmm.
The editor just changed the name. All the weird things we worry about. Spend less time looking at the data, more time writing.
So that's an intriguing point. So you've had editors change your story names. Do they ask for permission about that?
Almost never.
Wow. Okay.
Twice I've had people say, can you change the name? It sounds too much like something else.
Mm-hmm.
I have not had a lot of problems with editors changing the stories,
Okay.
although there have been a few where the story was almost unrecognizable.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And what they said was, we know what our readers want.
Mm-hmm.
And they want, in the second paragraph, be a reference to a potted plant. So they would just insert a potted plant into the second paragraph. It was strange. I think I actually compared the two, the printed version and what I sent them, and it was less than a third of the sentences were untouched.
Wow.
Some of them were almost unrecognizable. Some of them were badly written.
Mm-hmm.
And you wonder, it's like, why did they buy it?
Mm-hmm.
But then they're like, can you send us more? Like, no, I don't think so. The money was good. I'm not doing it again.
Mm-hmm. This is unusual that they do that, but I suppose, I go back to the Harry Potter author had 20 or 25 publishers turn down her work because they thought it wasn't going to sell well. So they often get locked into their own little worlds and say, oh, I know what the readers want. I know what's going to sell. And then they're completely wrong when something else comes along and gets out there. People like it.
The most successful things are almost always things that weren't what people thought would sell.
Mm-hmm.
It's a crazy busy business.
Yeah. Well, and Carrie got turned down, I think, 30 times by
Yeah.
Stephen King because people said, who in the world is going to want to watch or read this story about a teenage girl in menstrual blood? And then it became a huge top seller. So you never know what's going to catch someone's attention. And maybe those things that are out there that you say, no one's going to like this because it's too strange. Maybe that's the whole reason people like it, because they haven't heard a story like that before.
I've talked a lot with different editors, and one of the things that they look at is not so much this particular story or the writing, but just, is this someone I can trust that's going to turn in the rewrites on time, that isn't going to be crazy calling me every day with questions and complaints, and that I can trust is going to continue sending me material.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just act professional and give them what they want, the way they want it,
Mm-hmm.
that will often outweigh the story and the writing itself.
Okay. Yeah, because they just rather not deal with the grief with someone else, even if they're writing slightly more polished or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. So what else are you working on?
Right now, brainstorming a novel. It's a mystery. And I'm at the very beginning stages of it, but I see what I think the ending is going to have to be. And I don't know that I like it. And I don't know whether readers will be happy with it.
Mm-hmm.
So once I can convince myself that, yes, I can be happy with it, then it's my job as a writer to make the readers happy with it.
Right. Yep.
So.
Well, this is Zuzu. Let's come to visit. She always has to stick her head into talks at least once, as long as she doesn't step on the keyboard and turn something off.
Well, it does look like your video is frozen, so maybe she did.
Uh-oh, I should be fine. Am I back?
No,
Hmm.
you turned into a still photograph.
Well, it's moving on my end, so I suppose you get to talk to a still person for a while until this thing catches back up again. That's odd. I can't think of why. Let me try shutting some things down, just in case that helps. Yeah, hopefully it comes back for you.
Oh, there you are.
Oh, okay, that's good.
And the
So,
cat's still in the frame.
yeah, she's doing what she's doing. She's probably drinking out of the fountain now, or trying to knock things over. All right, so what horror stories do you have out and available that people can read?
I don't really know. With the, it, well, whatever anthologies are still in print.
Okay.
So it's a wide range of stories. There's a page on my website that lists all the anthologies, so that would give you a good sense of which anthologies you might want to track down, whatever piques your interest in terms of subgenres of the horror world.
So I see horrors of history. So what was your story in there? Do you remember? Take a look. See, now this is a memory test for you.
Huh.
I could just click on this and then see if it says, oh, it doesn't say it by name, so I'd have to read you all the names. All right, well, people can take a look on Amazon and see what the different options are for you. But it does look like there's a number of different anthologies available.
The Horrors of History, I think that was a Deepwater horror one,
Oh, okay.
but I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that.
Oh, it's talking about Roanoke and Vlad the Impaler, Jack the Ripper in the Civil War. So we'll figure that out. Best New England crime stories with Blood Moon. So you've got a bunch of different things in here for people to read.
Yes.
Best New England crime stories 2015. So whether people like horror or crime or other topic areas. Oh, and the Dictionary of Made Up Languages that I love. So what advice? Oh, go ahead.
I just remember talking about memory, someone wrote me an email saying, "You killed me, ha ha ha." And I'm looking at the name saying, I have never used that as a character name. And then I did a search of the hard drive, and yes, I had killed the character by that name. Oh, why would I know? I only write them.
Well, you have quite a number of things you've written, so it makes sense that you won't keep track of it. So what advice would you give to a new horror author?
Write what scares you.
Mm-hmm.
Write it, take the risks going to places that you're nervous about going, because that's where you're going to get your most meaty material. And then go through the horror of the submission process and just keep sending it out until it finds a home, or self-publish it if you would rather go that way.
Mm-hmm.
And just keep writing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose that's the write what you know and what makes sense to you. And I think that does help you bring it to richer life. It's something that you personally get a reaction out of. Hopefully you can then convey that to the reader so they get a reaction out of it.
Right.
So where can people find you? Not like in real life. I mean like on the web.
Basically just the website, stephendrogers.com.
Mm-hmm.
I'm supposedly on Facebook, because you're supposed to be on Facebook, and I log into Facebook once every 6 months, I confirm some friends, and then I log out.
Mm-hmm.
Twitter, I probably haven't been in for 2 years. I think there was an Instagram account. I know there was a Pinterest account,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not about, I have nothing to just say in general to the world.
Mm-hmm.
If there's anything I have to say, it comes out in the fiction.
Okay.
So then, blog. I had a blog for a while, but again, it's like making things up to say when I have real things to say. Just read the fiction.
Yep. All right,
So,
so people should check your website, and that'll tell them
yeah.
where the latest things are being released and where to find you.
And they can find what it is that speaks to them.
Hmm. That sounds great. Do you have any other thoughts you'd like to share?
Keep writing, keep reading.
Well, thank you very much for joining me. It was great to talk with you.
Great to talk to you too.
All right, have a good weekend.
You too.
All right, bye.